Welcome to The Pilot Life, the show where we sit down with people who are passionate about aviation. My name is Brendan. I've been a commercial airline pilot for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard some incredible stories. This is the show that I share those with you. Welcome on board. All right, welcome back to The Pilot Life show. Here we are. Like we say, Joe, another pilot, another living room. Thank you for welcoming us into your home.
My pleasure.
It's wonderful to be here with you. Now I met you. You did some of my captain upgrade training, but I think I knew you before that a little bit.
I did, because you were an FOI.
Yes, I was a first officer instructor, and so I would have been in some of those meetings that you were in.
Right, yeah.
You were always the very tip of the spear. I was kind of more, down. The not so important part,
It's just about being around long enough.
That's right. Well, so we like to start out, like, where was that aviation spark? Where did that start for you, that kind of dream of flying?
My dad was a commercially rated pilot. He did not fly commercially. He was a land surveyor, but he had a college degree when he went off to the Marine Corps and to serve in Korea. And since he already had a degree, he used his GI Bill to learn to fly. And that was back in the early mid-50s. And so we didn't own an airplane or anything, but once in a while he'd take me out flying. And the first time was when I was 4 years old. And that was it.
Where at?
Malin Suite Airport.
Yeah.
Eugene, Oregon.
Well, Malin Suite.
That's it.
Was this the new Malin Suite or the old airport that you guys flew out of when you were 4?
Well, it's in the same place, right?
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Because in I think it was early 1950s, the airport was like 18th and Chambers.
Not that old, Brennan. Come on. This would have been about 1966, something like that.
Okay.
In fact, my dad was, as I said, it was a surveyor for the city of Eugene at that time, and he actually did a lot of the surveying to improve the airport to what it is now.
So then when did you get into flight training and kind of start to do all that?
So when I was 10, I moved here to Bend, Oregon, where I grew up, and probably age 12 or 13, probably, the little Bend Air Show. Bend Airport's tiny, and yet the Thunderbirds showed up.
Wow.
And they performed. At that time, they were flying F4s, and it was quite a show. And just a lot of noise, and I was completely blown away.
Those F4s are so cool, aren't they? God, belching out just black smoke as they're flying around.
Oh yeah. And so I just at that moment said, "Hey, I want to fly fighters in the Air Force."
Yeah.
And so that's kind of was the impetus to everything.
So you see the Thunderbirds, you got dreams of being a fighter pilot, going in and flying F4s and joining the Thunderbirds, and thoughts about airlines at all, or was it purely military?
Purely.
Yeah, I was kind of the same way. I was like, I want to go be a fighter pilot.
Yeah, that's all I really wanted to do, and didn't really think too much about what would happen after that.
Yeah.
That's not something you think about when you're that age, right? You just want to go do it.
That's right.
So I focused on the academy because I thought that was the only way to get in to the Air Force and fly. And getting in the academy is tough. And I had good grades. My SAT score wasn't quite so good.
Okay.
And also, I didn't really have any great connections in order to get a congressional appointment. Also, I was involved in music, oddly, rather than I was pretty athletic, and I was really involved in skiing mainly, but I wasn't on the ski team. And so those were all the kind of things that they looked for.
Yeah.
And so I miserably failed. I did not get into the academy.
You said you were into music. What do you mean into music?
I was a violinist, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Still?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I have a violin and I play it once in a while. But
yeah.
No, I not like I used to.
Okay. And so the Air Force Academy looks for, because they have a lot of really qualified people applying for these positions.
Right.
And so they look for those things that set you apart.
Right. And at that time, I don't know about now, but at that time, it really helped to be, sort of captain of the football team kind of guy.
Okay.
People that were really obviously natural leaders.
Right.
And it was easy to take people that were really involved in sports that were team captains and things like that that was just a really easy way to gauge if somebody had a natural leadership quality with them. Whereas, playing in an orchestra is not really quite the same. So I was actually went off to University of Oregon, and I was a music performance major there. And then it took me about 6 months to realize, oh wait, there's this thing called ROTC.
So when the Air Force said no to you, did you think that door was closed, like that your Air Force dream was done?
It did. It was crushing, absolutely crushing. It was really, honestly, could have been, probably certainly the darkest part of my youth, because everything was about that. And when it didn't work out, I was just devastated. And, those are the things that you carry. Those are the things that make you who you are. And that you just keep digging. You just keep digging. And
did you then think, okay, well, maybe I can go and become some other kind of pilot? Or
yeah, I did. Okay. But I needed to make a decision like yesterday about where I was going to go to school. And like I said, about 6 months into the program, I realized that there was different ways. I think there's two other ways to get into the flying side of the Air Force, which is ROTC or Officer Candidate School, Officer Training School.
Right.
U of O didn't have one. Oregon State University, they had a great program. And so I went and talked to them, and they encouraged me to come and start at my sophomore year.
So when you get done with that program, you graduate, you have a bachelor's degree in?
Geology.
Geology, okay.
Yeah. So, and then when you graduate, you get a commission, and they pin on your butter bars then.
Okay.
And it was really helpful. It was very, very competitive to get a pilot slot. There was a lot of kids in RTC, but very, very few pilot slots available. And so it was very, very competitive. And one thing that was helpful was to have a tech major, something that, as opposed to a business degree or a Bachelor of Arts or something. So no desire to become a geologist, but it was cool. I learned a lot.
Yeah. It was very competitive to get a pilot slot. So how did that come about then that you were given a pilot slot?
Kept my grades up, and I volunteered for a few things. I was Arnold Air Society was one. It was a service organization. I was on the drill team. I was the commander of the drill team. So every 6 a.m., 5 days a week. 5 days a week we were out there, 6 a.m., learning how to drill, and we did competitions and stuff. But grades is a gigantic part of it. And then the last piece of it is come up with the name. It's been a while. The AFOQT. It's a written test that is supposed to sort of evaluate your natural abilities to be a pilot. And for example, looking at sort of a three-dimensional object and then showing you 3 or 4 other pictures of it and figure out which one is which. And the idea there is it's about three-dimensional thinking and how can you discern the differences. And they would show you things like attitude instruments and say, what is your attitude right now? That's kind of all I remember about it. But since I had been so steeped in flying all my life, I did really quite well on it. And so out of in the beginning of my class, I think we had about 140 applicants. They award them at the end of your second year, of your sophomore year.
Okay.
And they awarded 5 pilot slots.
Would people who didn't get a pilot slot and they were in ROTC could they then apply in their junior year to try to get it?
No, that was it.
So would they just drop out of the program then?
Well, like a good friend of mine, one of my classmates really wanted to become a pilot as well, and he didn't quite make the mark, and so he went off to nav school. He became a navigator.
So you're off to pilot training. Where at?
Del Rio, Texas, Laughlin Air Force Base.
How is it there? There's a lot of pilot training down there, isn't there?
Well, interestingly, everybody wanted Willie, which is Williams Air Force Base near Phoenix.
Okay.
And I got that assignment. And I don't know why. I had this thing where I thought Laughlin just seemed like it would be a place where it would be a great place to learn to fly. The airspace was wide open. There wasn't a lot of distractions out there.
Yeah.
Really wasn't. And there was a guy in my class who had a Laughlin assignment. I swapped with him. and I went to Laughlin.
Okay, so you're down in Texas. What airplane is the first airplane that you fly there?
That's a T-37.
Yeah. So what were those first few flights like in a jet?
It was something.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just, I mean, obviously I've been doing some flying. It wasn't an environment that I was not used to.
Right.
But I wasn't used to, nobody was used to flying around with a helmet and, piece of rubber on their face and
Right.
a flight suit and
Yeah.
a parachute
Yeah.
on your back, and everything's weird.
Yeah.
And it's super intense.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what Air Force pilot training is like now. I know it is quite different. It was called Air Force pilot training, training through fear, ridicule, and insult, or whatever it was. And it was intense, man.
Yeah.
The instructors were hardcore, and there was no timeouts.
Yeah. So were you just involved in that 24/7 then, engaged?
Oh, yeah.
So like your time off is just prepping for the next lesson, and
There was no time off.
yeah.
It was the most intense, incredible year of my life. It was scary. It was fun, so fun. It was exciting, and every day you walked into the squadron building, that could be your last. I mean, you were always 3 rides away from failure. So we started with 68 in the class, graduated 37.
Out of the T-37 or just
out of
total?
the whole program, the whole year.
Okay.
Right. So about 6 months in the 37, then off to the White Rocket, to the T-38.
What was it like though, going from the T-37 to that first flight in the T-38? Because now you have an afterburner, right?
Yeah, it's a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about it is it's beautiful. It's an incredible airplane, and you have a G suit on now, and it's tandem instead of side by side. So your instructor's behind you, and it's fast. Everything happens 3 times faster than in the tweet.
Yeah.
Right. So, but it's exhilarating. I truly love that airplane.
Yeah.
And came out of 37s. I was doing pretty well, but not probably at the top of my class.
Yeah.
But when I got to 38s, I found my footing.
That was it, huh?
That was it. I knew I really loved that airplane. It was just tremendous.
How long do you think it takes pilots to get to that point where they feel comfortable in a plane? Because you've worked with new pilots on a 737. You've been a new pilot in a T-38. Is there a time frame, or is it different for everyone?
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. And I think it's something I think about a lot as an instructor now, even. And I look back on this. So when I started T-37s, I did fine. An instructor was there. I flew fine. I made good decisions. I was well prepared. But it came to the first check ride, which is a contact check, and it's basically a pre-solo check. And everything had been going perfectly. And now I had this instructor sitting next to me giving me a check ride, and that was the first one I'd ever had. And he just sat there, didn't say a thing. And I didn't do very well. I flew fine. I flew the maneuvers fine. I didn't make any big errors. And yet I was indecisive. I kept looking to my right going, okay, what do we do next? Kind of thing. And so he failed me. On there's 6 check rides in pilot training. I failed the first one. And, oh man, that was a crushing blow. I remember afterwards, the instructor talked to me about it, and he was old crusty major, and he was kind of mean, and he said, hey, you fly okay. You just, you need to change gears. You're in charge, man. And so I went off and thought about it I don't think I flew the next day. The next ride is a 87 ride, they call it. And that's where they come in and do some more training and with an instructor and see what the problems are and resolve them.
And so not only are you dealing with what you messed up on, but now you're dealing with the mental aspect.
Right.
Oh, this is in jeopardy now because
Right.
I just failed something.
That's right. So most of the people who wash out of pilot training wash out on the 88 ride. So there's the check ride. If you fail that, it's the 87, which is the training ride. The 88's the recheck.
Yeah.
And that's where that's it.
Yeah.
And because if you fail that one, there's actually one more. It's called the 89 ride. And that one's kind of profundity.
You don't want to go to the
You don't want to go to the 89. Right? Right. So, but leading up to that, I just said, I realized I hope this answers your question, is I had realized I have to think differently. It's not just a skill set. It's about leaning forward, being confident, and just, you're in charge. You don't care about this. He's just dead weight over there. And it was a mental switch. And so on the 87 ride, I didn't look to my right. And I flew the ride, and the guy goes, I don't know why we're here. I was fine. I said, okay. 88 ride, same thing. And this guy, they bring in the majors and above to do the 88s and 89s. And he came back, landed, and he goes, I don't know why we did that. That was just fine. So that's just the first phase of T-37 training for me, was to learn how to, not just the maneuvers and how to fly the jet, how to do the procedures, all the training, because we had classroom every day and learn, basically get your instrument exam, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's the switch to a leadership mentality, to what we call, command authority.
Right.
And so, sometimes, in the airline world, you have new captains that have been flying for a very long time.
Yeah.
And they're not there. They're looking to their right. They're waiting for somebody to make a decision for them. And so that was a turning point for me.
How early on in a pilot's training should they start to approach their flying with that mentality?
First day.
Yeah.
First day. Because, I know that's a lot to expect, because in the beginning it's just intimidating.
Yeah.
You're a fish out of water there for a little bit. But at some point, when you're going from different kinds of maneuvers, turn around to point and landing and pattern work and transitioning from one thing to the other.
Right.
And those transitions is where you got to go, okay, this is what we're doing, and we're going to go.
Yeah.
And I think that within the first, before you solo, you have to think that way.
Yeah. So you did well in training, and so now is this the time where all you guys get into a room and they start to assign airplanes? Is this
at the end, the very end?
We are there. Okay.
Absolutely. The last week.
Yeah.
Of pilot training.
And so what were you thinking in terms of airplanes at this point? Like what were you thinking of your options were going?
Interesting that what I went into pilot training with was the F-16 was really top of my list. I just think it's just a sexy airplane, and it's cool. And then probably the F-15 after that. There was really, F-4 was on its way out. There was a few RF-4s around, but there was really no F-4s. But anything with a pointy nose was kind of my wish. And in the very last phase of training, you do air to ground, low-level navigation. So I'm in a T-38 up in Big Bend, which I didn't know that existed. It's a beautiful part of Texas, up in the northwest corner of Texas. And we're out there in a T-38, and the idea is you have your low-level map, and it's all clock map ground. There's it's just steam gauges, and you're learning how to do that. But there's these big canyons in Big Bend. And so I'm going through this canyon with ridgeline above my shoulders, and I'm doing 550 knots. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. I want to do this.
Yeah.
So I came back from those flights, and that's when we were filling out our dream sheets. And I wanted to fly anything that did that. And so I had A10 at the top of my list. And then I still had F-16 in the top three. Mm-hmm. I even had an F-111 in there, which thank God I didn't get, because they do that at very high speeds. That was where I switched gears and said, no, I don't really want to fly up, in the stratosphere. I want to get down low, real low.
Yeah.
And assignment night came down, and we do this big thing. And this is dating myself, man, but nobody's going to know what I'm talking about right now. Johnny Carson was the Tonight Show at that time. And they had this skit that they would do once in a while where they would hold a card over their forehead, and they would see the answer. It was this sort of genie kind of guy.
Right.
And it was just, a comedy sketch. And so that's what they did. They would give hints And so what he said was, "Oh, I see. It's very foggy."
So you're holding something up on your...
This guy behind me has got this. I'm seeing this very foggy, and it's raining a lot, and then they announce, and they put it on the screen, and they announced A10 to RAF Bentwaters, and it's on a stage, and all your classmates are all down in front of you, and I exploded. I jumped off the stage like a rock star, and they caught me in their arms. And it was just,
yeah.
I hate to. Hopefully, I don't know if my wife will think about this, but it was the happiest moment of my life. Okay,
Right.
Sorry, honey.
Well, but think back to that application to the Air Force Academy where you thought that dream was over. I'm sure that was just like a tremendous release of like,
Right.
oh my gosh.
And not just that, it was everything. Back when I was in college, by the way, between my junior and senior year, I had a pretty bad accident. I was rock climbing on the Oregon coast, and we had finished rock climbing, and we were just kind of climbing down a trail that had a kind of bouldering, and so I had to put my arm around this big basalt column in order to swing my leg around and then get back on a trail. It was a little spot that you had to a little sketchy spot. And that basalt column, which probably weighed about 5,000 pounds, chose at that moment to come loose from the side of the mountain. And so I had I had a finger hold and a toe hold on one side. I was reaching across, and the thing just came off. And so all I could do is really just kind of hinge away from the side of the cliff, let it fall, and I knew I couldn't hang on, so I jumped. It was 35 feet. Dang. And it was the beach down below me, and I'm looking down, and time kind of slows down. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to put one foot there and the other one right there. I'm going to monkey roll right there, and it'll be fine. But what I didn't realize from that far up was that little boulder that I was putting one foot on either side of turned out to be about chest high. And so as I came down, I hit my chin, and I shattered my jaw into 35 pieces, broke all my teeth out, and spent 2 weeks in the hospital. I went in at 146 pounds. I came out at 118. I was a mess, but man, I was not going to let that pilot slot go.
How much do you think passion plays into that? Do you think that you would have been as stubborn if you were pursuing something that you weren't?
No,
Yeah,
absolutely not. I mean, this is the only thing I ever wanted to do. And so I worked so hard, and I did the same thing in pilot training. I like I said, that first check ride, 237s, that failure was another one of those moments for me. It was like,
So tell me about the first time that you saw one of these.
So the first time I saw one was at Laughlin Air Force Base, and I had received the assignment, so I was pretty stoked about it.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen one up close. And so there was a couple of transients that landed there, and we saw them sitting out by base ops. And so a couple of buddies of mine and I went out there, and it was a couple hundred yards away. And so as we walked towards the airplane, it sort of loomed larger and larger and larger. And suddenly I'm looking up at this huge airplane, 56-foot square, and real tall gear, that 7-barrel gal weight sticking out the front. And I mean, I was sold. That was cool.
Were your buddies also going to fly it too?
There was one other guy in my class who
Okay.
had an A10 as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when your first time flying it though is when you report over
Right.
in England, right?
No. So what you do is you graduate pilot training, undergraduate pilot training with your wings and your assignment. And then because I was a fighter attack kind of guy, we went to fighter lead-in school. That at that time was in New Mexico and by White Sands. Mm-hmm. So that's where we flew T-38s, but they had heads-up displays and bomb racks on them.
Okay.
And so we did more low-level flying, and we went to the range and dropped bombs, and they even had a little gun pod on one that you could fire. But mostly it was all air-to-air. So it was basic fighter maneuvers, and we learned how to, defend ourselves and also, be both defensive and offensive. And
Yeah.
it was intense.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Yeah. Air to air. I mean, the A10 has the ability, right?
Sure does. Yeah. It's definitely not its role.
Right.
But so our philosophy with that was that it was a defensive, mission.
Right.
Not get shot down.
Right.
But, it had an offensive capability, and we did shoot down helicopters and stuff, in the Gulf. And, we carried AIM-9 Limas. Mm-hmm. And that gun was not something that you want to get the wrong end of. If you pointed your nose at a fighter, then they would honor that gun and they'd come off because it was a mean SOB.
I can remember as a kid, because I would study fighter jets and what they were armed with and their capability. And the A10, it was something like that. It can put from a mile away, like with 1 5-second burst or something. It was however many hundreds or thousands of rounds within like an 8-foot circle from a mile away. It was just incredible. Do you know what that gun can actually do?
Yeah. So the GAU-8, we carried 1,100 rounds, which is an ungodly amount of rounds. I mean, it's tough to empty a full barrel. I mean, when we went out with usually 100 rounds on a trip to the range. But 1,000 rounds is just an incredible firepower. 1,100 rounds per second, 70 per second. Now, I wish I'd brought one with me, but the rounds,
the gun,
no, the bullet, the round is about a foot long.
Yeah,
and it's 30 millimeter, so it's a cannon shell. It's massive.
Yeah,
the range on a tank shot, you try to get them inside of 2,500 feet, which is really close because you just needed that much energy to make it through that much, rolled armor. Soft skin vehicle you could kill from well outside of a mile, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one squeeze for a second is 70 rounds.
Yeah.
And so that's that sound of that smoke that you hear when they go through that.
Right. So the first part of that, it has to come up to speed. So it's not quite 70 in a 1 second burst.
Yeah.
But when it's rolling, that's how fast it's shooting. And the way we thought of it, a lot of people don't know this. They think of it as kind of like an automatic weapon, like you'd kind of sweep it around or something. But the way we'd fire that is as a single shot. So you'd line up your shot and you'd just do a combat squeeze and think of it as a single shot on a single target.
Yeah.
You would never move it around, or the idea was to get the tightest bullet dispersion, the highest bullet density in the smallest areas you possibly could. Yeah. And that's how you kill a tank.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell me about that first flight.
The first flight, and by the way, after a fighter lead-in school in New Mexico, you went to Tucson.
Okay.
Davis Mountain Air Force Base is the RTU. The first time you fly an A10 is solo. They don't make 2-seat versions of that airplane. So you go out to the area and do aerobatics and stalls and falls and just the normal stuff, and then you come back and beat up the pattern and land, and that was your first flight.
What was your thought from coming from the T-38 to fly? I mean, obviously this is a slower airplane. Yeah. In terms of like the responsiveness and, thrust and all that.
You'd think you'd be kind of a dog, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You can fly with your fingertips, and it's just the T-38 had a 720 degree per second roll rate. I mean, there's nothing going to beat that, really. But so the hog wouldn't roll quite that fast. But no adverse yaw, had a really good yaw sass on it, and it was just very balanced in pitch and roll. We didn't really do much with the rudders, crosswind landings and stuff, kind of like airliners. But very, very, very easy to and just fun and nimble. Yeah, very, very nimble airplane.
Yeah. So you get checked out in Tucson.
Yeah.
And this is in what kind of time frame are we talking right now?
This is in the spring of 1986.
And what's going on in the world in 86? Like, what would be the mission of the A10?
We were in the height of the Cold War.
Okay.
Not the height of it, but certainly, actually, in retrospect, it was near the end of the Cold War. But, we were, the whole mission of the A10 and USAFE in Europe was to be an anti-tank, anti-armor weapon when the Russian horde came over the hill with their 8 billion tanks and all their gear. Right. So the idea of the A10 in Europe was it was the biggest fighter wing in the world. And the idea was that they expected, the Russians to when they attacked, they were going to go chemical and biological and maybe nuclear, tactical nukes. And so the idea was to have a kind of a safer place to maintain the airplanes, and then we'd deploy forward and fight the war in Germany. And so our mission was called the Fulda Gap, and that's where this pinch point where we knew the Russians were going to come. Most of their armor was going to come through the gap, and that was our area of concern.
And so you were based in England, but you would then forward position to these other bases?
2 weeks in and 2 weeks out. So
2 weeks back to England?
Literally of my 3 years there, a year and a half of that was in Germany.
Wow.
Yeah, in and out.
And you're out just training every day it was every day.
Yeah, so we'd fly the jets in early Monday morning, and we'd fly missions all week long.
Yeah.
And then we'd take a break on the weekend, stay there, and that was fun because we had a 9-pack to, a VW bus that we'd drive around and explore.
Yeah.
Have fun, and then we'd come back Monday morning, and the idea was not to bother the Germans on weekends, because we'd buzz over their house pretty low.
Yeah.
So we'd just fly on weekends, weekdays. We would do that for 2 full weeks, and we'd fly them home on Friday or Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was the Berlin Wall still up at this point?
Yeah. So that was, like I said, that was full on, and we had, there was a demilitarized zone between East and West Germany that was very, very sensitive, and flying around over there, the weather was terrible a lot.
Yeah.
And yet we flew low-level missions in that airplane with nothing but a map and a compass and a clock.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you got, it was usually up near the East German border, and if you got too close to it, you were done. They'd take your wings.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just would not put up with that. I mean, you're flying, you're scud running, the visibility minimum was supposed to be 3 miles. We often press that.
Yeah.
And we're moving along to target ingress speeds at 360. So you're going 6 miles a minute. And if you make the wrong heading, you're gonna screw up, and you're gonna be the guy that just goes back home without his wings.
Yeah.
So it was full on.
Yeah.
It was intense.
Were there any missions that kind of stand out to you of like, oh, that was memorable, whether for something good or something bad?
They were all memorable.
Yeah.
But I remember being a pretty new 4-ship flight lead in the middle of the winter. The weather's terrible. I'm dragging a 4-ship through 2 miles of visibility. It's hilly out there in the Fulda Gap. It's mountainous.
Yeah.
And big radio towers, 600-800 feet high. And I know it's out there somewhere. I'm trying to find it without hitting the guy wires. And I got to think about, because they're not looking at the terrain so much, they're looking at me.
Right.
And so all the turns there's no comm. You do it. You give them signals by wing rocks, and that's how you kind of direct the formation around.
Yeah.
And when you're doing a box like that or an offset box, it's tough. And so those are the ones I remember. We're working out there very close to the East German border. You got to watch where you are. You can't get lost. It's very easy to get lost. All you got is a map, and there's always the potential of the weather moving in, and you got to route abort out of it. And tell you what, when you go and do that, and you go back to Simbach, and they'd quick turn you. You go through a hot fueling pit while you're still running. They'd put some more gas in you, and they'd send you back out. And you go sometimes twice, and even sometimes 3 times in a single day. And each mission was about an hour and a half. And get back that night, and you felt good.
Yeah.
But I was tired. It was fun. It was intense, and I have a lot of memories but not one mission in particular, much, but a bunch of them where it was hard.
Yeah,
it was really hard.
Eventually, come back to Tucson, right?
Yeah,
after your stint over there in Europe.
Right. Yeah, after 3 years in Europe, I went back to teach the A10 school.
Okay, so you're back in Tucson. You're teaching.
Yeah.
Passing on your knowledge of the A10, because now we're getting into Desert Storm. So you're training pilots now to go into combat, right?
Right.
Are you starting to kind of see like maybe the airlines are a path here that I could take?
Yeah, I was beginning to think that I probably wasn't going to be a career officer.
Yeah.
My the love for me was flying airplanes. And I'm seeing the majors and above, do a lot of staff duty, and they're doing a lot more things outside the flight, the cockpit. And I didn't think that going to the Pentagon was something I really wanted to do. And also, I was married. I didn't have any kids yet, but we wanted to have kids. And I just felt like I was time for, to have a more settled life. And so, that's when I said, okay, I think I'm ready I've had my fun.
Yeah.
And I think it's time to go and just get a job.
Okay.
As opposed to, because, in the Air Force, you ate, slept, drank, everything. Everything was about the job. I mean, I didn't think much about anything else. It was, especially in that first 3 years at Bentwaters, Woodbridge, every day was a 12-hour day. And if you weren't flying, you were thinking about flying. It was complete immersion.
Yeah.
And that's the way I wanted it. And so I felt like, maybe it's time to experience a different aspect of my life. And so, that's when I started thinking about flying in the airlines.
Is this where you hop onto Google and you start searching for airline interview prep and all that stuff?
Yeah, no Google.
No Google.
No Google, right. So we had, also what contributed to this was, it was the end of the Gulf War. And we were the most experienced A10 pilots in the world, and the fighter weapons school guys. And yet we saw it from the sidelines. We watched the Gulf War happen on CNN. Mm-hmm. And it was heartbreaking. I mean, at the expense of sounding like a warmonger, that's what you train for. That's what you always saw yourself doing. And I had to watch it on CNN. I was sending students over there. Right. One of who got shot down, and initially we thought he was listed KIA, his flight lead as MO, missing in action, and turned out it was the other way around. And so my student was a prisoner of war, and he came out of it. So I mean, it was real.
Yeah.
So,
but you are a young man. You're flying the A10, which, great. It's fun. And we talk about the aviation, how cool it is, but this is a machine of war.
Yeah.
This has a purpose.
Oh yeah.
And as a pilot, you're part of that purpose.
Right.
And I think maybe there's, what people may not understand is, you're trained up and ready to go serve your purpose, serve your country. And did you feel like maybe because you weren't actively in there that I didn't quite get to that full purpose, full
it was a
potential?
setback for me.
Okay.
If you think about it, we were in Vietnam 13 years before that. You think about back to the F-105, the Thud. Those guys, 50% survival rates, or at least getting out at the end of their 100 missions, whether they were in, the Hanoi Hilton or whether they didn't make it out at all. So the Air Force was, we had our fangs out. That's why it was so intense to be in USAF pilot training, because we weren't just there to learn how to fly. We were there to learn how to fight. And so at some point I thought, okay, now the Air Force is drawing down. It's a RIF. And I think I'm probably not going to be able to hang on to a cockpit. That's probably going to have to go to be a air liaison officer somewhere, which is an Air Force guy that kind of oversees forward air controllers. All those things added up to, I think it's time to move on. Yeah. So then back to so all the squadrons had intel. We had these huge binders full of everything you ever could possibly want to know about United, about Delta, about American, about everyone else, every airline. And so I was actually, and I did, I applied to all those airlines, but I also applied to Alaska Airlines, which nobody knew existed. I mean, it was this little tiny airline. And the reason I got to know them is because that's how I flew home. My folks lived here in Bend, and that was the airline that flew from Tucson to Portland, and then Horizon to Redmond, and that's how I'd get home. Yeah. So, and I thought, it's a friendly little airline, and I just think it's cool. Yeah. So I applied to Alaska, and there was zero intel.
Zero gouge, huh?
No gouge.
Wow.
None. And
And is this gouge, these are the questions they ask you on the interview?
Right. This
all
is what the
stuff, right?
interview sim looks like.
Okay, yeah.
This is when you're doing an interview, it's kind of good to know about the history of the airline and stuff like, and there'd be all that intel in there. Who's the chief pilot, all the intel.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I had my Finney flight. I'm waiting for a call because all my applications have been out.
From anyone.
Yeah. And so a couple days later, I get that call, and it's from Alaska Airlines. And they said, hey, would you be willing to be here the day after tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the morning? I'm like, absolutely. No problem.
Yeah.
Luckily, I had my suit done. I was ready.
Yeah.
But as far as interview prep, I certainly was not ready. And I didn't know anything about Alaska Airlines, nothing. So thank God there was a guy that was also on base on Davis-Monthan who was in the 130, the EC 130 unit down the street. And he had just interviewed. And one of the guys in my squadron was married to one of the pilots in that same squadron. And she knew this Brian Osborne, who they connected us. And he saved my life, man.
Yeah.
I owe him my job. Man, you guys, amazing. He came back and he already had some intel. He had some family connections with Alaska Airlines, and so anyway, he came in and told me about what I was expected to do.
Right.
And so I actually had to race out to the Tucson airport and hire a guy to teach me how to do civilian holding and how to do an AD or NDB approach, which I hadn't done since T-37s.
Yeah, because you're coming from flying the A10. Military rules, military airspace, military, completely separate from what we do on the civilian side. Okay, so you go up to Seattle to interview?
Yeah, and so 5 a.m., I show up, in my blue suit at the training center, and there are two other guys that show up with me that are applicants, and it was the interview sim was in the MD-80, and it was Steve Sanford, and you may recognize that name. He was the fleet captain for the 727. And so standing next to me is my longtime friend, Patrick Miller. He's the other applicant. And Joe Martin, who unfortunately was hired and was very successful, but unfortunately passed away from lung cancer many years after that. So he's no longer with us. But we all trundled into the MD-80 sim. And you know how it is. Each one of them cycles to the left seat, and that's who's being evaluated. And the guy in the right seat just kind of giving him, but he's not supposed to help him. And then the third guy's kind of sitting in the jump seat just watching what's going on. And I'm pretty sure I started out in the jump seat, and I cycled to the right seat, and then I finally ended up in the left seat. And we are still talking about that and laughing about that story. The fact that we made it through that, because it was hard, man. It was no flight directors. I had never flown with this crazy yoke thing, and throttles completely on the wrong side of the airplane, and everything's different. Yeah. And it was based in Anchorage. You took off on at that time 6, right, I believe, and you took off and you intercepted a radial outbound for a bit, and then you made a big arcing. You flew an arc all the way around to the NDB, to a direct entry to holding, to a timed NDB approach, to a missed approach, back out for another radial to an arc, to a outbound holding to an ILS to a full stop.
This is why pilots want gouge,
right?
Because how would go into that cold and you have no prep, and suddenly you're doing an NDB approach?
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, we had this hilarious moment where I was completely task saturated, and I hit the NDB and I turned left, and I went out 3 minutes and turned left again, flew back over the NDB, and time, turn, throttles, twist, track, top.
Time, turn, throttles, twist, track. You had 6 T's, right?
Yeah.
Some people had 5 T's, some had 8 T's,
Right.
Yeah.
So I got to the time part, and I said, hack. And Pat Miller, Patio, sitting next to me, goes, what? I said, hack. What? He had no idea what I was saying. Oh. And finally I said, start the clock.
Oh, yeah.
And so
hack
that's somehow
whatever,
that we're still talking about it to this day.
Hack.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. When I went to the interview, I did not feel prepared. I had not really had any interview training, or there's probably a lot of things I should have done. And so I went off to the interview thinking, you know what? I don't know what the right answers are. I don't have the intel. I don't have the gouge. So you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and just be honest. I'm just going to give them whatever my heart says. And if that works, fine. If it doesn't, well, this is my practice interview.
Yeah.
Which was, I still wanted, that was still my first choice, but I just figured there's probably not any way in hell I'm going to get this job. So I just went into it with a very honest attitude and got through the interview fine. And if you get by the first the interview sim, if that goes well, you go to the first interview, and that's a board of pilots and HR. So then if that went well enough, then you'd go and stay the night and go get a physical. And if that went well enough, then you'd have a final interview with one-on-one with HR. And then you go home. And then you kind of sit there and twiddle your thumbs until they checked your background. And then I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to cop that cool attitude, like, whatever, if I get the job, fine. If I don't, that's cool too. And I got home, and like the next day, my wife came to me and said, turns out we're pregnant. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh. So suddenly getting that job became very important.
Yeah.
And so I sweat it out for another 48 hours. And I guess they probably scraped the bottom of the barrel, and they just finally had to hire me. So
I doubt that.
So they did.
Maybe though that attitude helped you not be so nervous about the interview.
It was. It was instrumental. I felt if I had that much pressure on me going into it, I don't think I would have been that good. Because you're going to think too much about the answer and not just be honest. So, yeah, it was a good move for me. But but it also goes to, not to sound stupid here, but I have a certain loyalty to this airline.
Yeah.
They hired me, and I have ever since had a great deal of loyalty to them and love this company, and mainly because I love its people. And I always have. So it's a good gig.
Yeah. What was the difference? Did you get hired in the 737?
No, 727. So there was most everybody goes to the engineer position first.
Right.
And somehow, luck would have it, they had enough people to fill those seats, and they had a few guys go to the MD-80 like Pat Miller did, and a couple guys went to the 200, and there was three engineer positions that they wanted to hold their schedules, and they couldn't fill them. So they actually hired me to the right seat of the 727, which was just awesome because it was a super cool airplane. And my job was to, jerk the gear and turn on the window heat. That was really literally my whole flow, and then fly every other leg. So, and then I had to watch all my classmates go through engineer training, which I used to call Alaska Inquisition. It was just it was like Air Force pilot training. It was brutal.
Yeah. And
they had to know how many rivets were on the elevator. It was just every detail they had to know, and all these flows, and everything was operated manually. And I'm watching these guys just going, thank God I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
It's more like astronaut training than pilot training.
Right.
And so then I did that. The airplane was it was being retired at that point.
This was in the mid-90s?
Early 90s, 92.
Early 90s,
yeah.
Okay.
And so I was only on the airplane for about 7 months and just really, really enjoyed it. And then they reduced me to the 737-200. They still had a Seattle base then. It was mostly cargo. It was all cargo. And then the day I finished 200 training, then I was reduced again to the Anchorage base.
So did you move your family up there?
Yeah, I didn't have to, but there was no flying south of Anchorage. That was all interior Alaska flying. Everything was a turn.
Yeah.
And I had a 5-month-old daughter at the time, and I just thought, man, I'm going to miss everything. So they were nice enough to come with me, and we had to rent our house out in Seattle and have an apartment up there. And my son was born in Anchorage. It was a great time. It was a cool base, and we did some really amazing things with that airplane.
Did you end up upgrading onto the 200?
No.
Oh,
So I did that for a few years, and there was some pull to come on back to the Pacific Northwest. So we moved back, and I flew the 400.
okay.
Yeah, and then but I did upgrade on the 7, up in Anchorage. That was on the NG, when the brand new NG base back in '02
Yeah.
is when I upgraded.
Upgraded in '02.
Yeah.
So you had
About 10 years.
About 10.
At that time, it was 9 to 10 years, maybe 11 to upgrade.
to upgrade.
Yeah.
Wow. What was your life like there as you kind of went through as a new captain, and just kind of your reflections on the next 20 or so years?
Well, leading up to upgrade, and again, upgrade now, what is it? 5, well, more now, but
Yeah.
at one point it was 5 years-ish, right? And when I was, when I got hired, first thing that happened was the engineers all came to left the engineer position and came forward, and that delayed everything. And then this age 65 rule hit, that delayed everything another almost 5 years. So basically, 10 or 11 years into my career, I'm upgrading. And I realized at that time I lived in the Portland area. That was before the Portland base opened. And I was commuting, and I had a young family, 2 young kids, and I felt like the right thing to do was to stay in the right seat, hold a better schedule, be home more, and that was my intention, and try to do the right thing. And at some point, though, as a senior FO, I'm starting to roll my eyes at the captains. I second guess everything they do.
Yeah.
Every decision they make is probably I would do the other thing. And I was losing my patience, and I'm just not wired to do it that way. And so I said, if I don't upgrade, I'm probably going to get in trouble. I mean, I'm going to say the wrong thing to the wrong guy, and that's not good. I just finally said, I gotta do what I'm wired to do.
Yeah.
And so I upgraded. But that was at the tail end of over 10 years in the right seat, and so I was pretty experienced, relatively skilled, and yet I put so much work in upgrade. I just felt like I had to become the subject matter expert in everything. And I went heads down I had 3 months warning before I started upgrade. And I was at my desk every night for 3 months.
Yeah.
And I took it very seriously. And I don't think that's always the case these days, because I wanted to walk in the door knowing my stuff. So that was how I approached upgrade, is that it's a very serious job, and you have to know, you can't rely on anybody for the answer. You got to know it yourself.
Did you have people that you would call, or people that you looked up to, that you would say, hey, what would you do during this time?
No,
Yeah,
I was
just knew it.
I was a lone ranger.
Just naturally.
Oh
gifted.
yeah, I never asked anybody anything. No. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There was giants out there. I mean, guys and gals that came before me.
Yeah.
That I looked up to. I mean, like, for example, the Anchorage base, when I was there, I mean, these guys expected a lot. And if you fell short, you heard about it. There was no being gentle back then. And so I respected that. So yeah, I felt like every time I went out to fly, I had something to prove.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Did you have any flights that kind of stick out? Any kind of those like memorable flights? Did you ever have an emergency, or, any kind of dark and stormy nights where you're like, ooh, that wasn't it?
Well, I flew a lot in Southeast Alaska. That was kind of my go-to place, and also the Arctic. I mean, and back in the day when we flew diving drives into gravel runways, when just scud run, it was challenging flying, and in Southeast where you kind of cut my teeth up there. And that's a skill set. I mean, the 200 program kind of expected you to be able to go through Southeast without looking at a single piece of paper. They were serious. And so, flying a 200 one time into Bethel and shut down an engine for an oil leak, and pretty crappy weather, and all those things where my goal, and this kind of goes back to my flying philosophy that I gained in the Air Force, because when I was a young wingman, I had all my other young wingman lieutenants. We called it lieutenant protectionists, the LPA, and we all kind of ganged together and kept the captains off our back, and they were all talking about becoming 2-ship flight leads, and they would be flying along, and they'd be actually looking at their map to see, okay, what's the flight lead thinking right now, or kind of getting into his head. And I didn't do that. My philosophy was be the best wingman in the squadron. Be the one that everyone wanted to fly with. True or not, that's what was my goal. And it served me well. And when I got, same thing, when I was an FO, my goal was to make the captain look good and, be an active crew member and point out when I thought something wasn't right. But I was about supporting and not thinking about being a captain yet.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, when I approached captain upgrade, I had to ask a lot of questions, and luckily those captains were all about teaching you the art, and they did.
As you're now getting kind of towards, we go through these stages in our pilot career, right?
Yeah.
We start off new and we're fresh and excited, and we've got 40 years in front of us, or 30 years, when kind of ever we enter. And then we kind of hit the midpoint and you say, oh, I'm as close to retirement as I was when I started. And then we start to hit what we call like the back nine, right?
Yeah.
Where we're like,
right.
I now see the majority of my flying behind me than what's in front of me. And I think there's a lot of value and knowledge we can gain from those kind of insights. So what do you think now as you're kind of nearing that kind of back nine and you're starting to see the majority of your flying behind you? What's your perspective on what that's meant for you and your family and being able to kind of live your dream? And then what would you want someone who's maybe at the first part of the career to maybe be like, oh, this is what I learned.
Yeah.
And you could maybe benefit from this.
Well, first of all, I've been very fortunate that I've been instructing for 18 or 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have been able to do this for that long. I have been mentoring and coaching and improving our training program, I hope, and challenging people's ideas. And for that whole time, especially the last 7 or 8, 9 years. And so when I look back on my career, I've already had the opportunity inexhaustibly to try to make it better. Speaking specifically about commercial aviation, it is important to remember, instead of taking this for granted, you have to understand that we all, stand on the shoulders of giants, that all those who came before us form this foundation that we stand on. And it's easy to forget that, but we've come a long way, and it's because of this thing I talked about before. It's, you don't just strap on the jet and go. You've got a huge team behind you, and we're all dedicated to making this safer and better, and we've been doing that for a long time. And so remember that someday you're the giant, that they're going to stand on your shoulders. And you got to become that giant. And then you're going to look back on it like I have, and you're going to go, yeah, that was a great career. Got no regrets. And I think if you think about it in those terms, it's going to be good.
Amen. Well, what the people who watch this know is I like to give away gifts here.
Oh.
Yeah. Aviation gifts.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And
I like whiskey. Because I'd take that.
No, this is not a gift for you. This is a gift for the people watching. Sorry. No, you don't get anything. Yeah. So I found a cool one. And I don't know if you've ever seen this brand, but since I just ordered it, I'm going to throw up a picture for people to see here.
Cool.
But let me show you what it looks like.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
We're going to give away. So a week after this airs, people go into the comments, say hi to Joe, leave a message. We appreciate you watching. And then randomly we'll draw a winner from that. And they're going to get
that's awesome, man.
Yeah, the Bristol A10 Thunderbolt watch.
Cool.
Which would be a cool little watch. So the next time you get into that hold and you say, hey, hack it. And they're like, what are you talking about? Hack it.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To share your story. Thank you for welcoming us into your house. Appreciate everything. Thank you for your training that you gave to me on my first trip.
Hopefully I didn't give you too many bad habits there.
It's all good.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for listening, for taking the time to check out the podcast. We'll see you next time.